Good afternoon, traders. This is Christian from Tropic Trade Group, and this is your end of day market recap for Monday, January 27th. Wow, what a day this was. Some ginormous moves in the AI space. I'll talk about that, and I'll talk a little bit about how you can kind of mitigate some of those losses that we're seeing all over the place in those groups today, those respective groups today. And then I'll talk about what actually did pretty well today. So before I do any of that, risk disclaimer in front of you, everything that we're going through is for information purposes only, not giving out any advice or recommendations. Everything that we're going through is for information purposes only. So let me talk a little bit about the AI stuff first. So on a day like this where there's new information that's come out about the possibility of like a faster model or a much cheaper model, I think that one of the things that I come back to is how far these AI stocks have gone and the rest of the market basically, and how much the market has been talking about AI and so forth. And I think from time to time, I'm not trying to I won't call like the top in AI or anything like that, but sometimes these things have to come down to reality a little bit. And I would also say too, a positive out of this is, we've heard about all these billions of dollars of investment that are needed to go into AI, and all these companies, the Meta, the Amazon, the Microsoft, spending all this money for AI, which to me, like I think AI is a theme, but I think it's also got a little bit overblown. And then we saw for a while all the power companies go, anything that had to do with, creating more power that was on the side of utility. But, what I'm referring to is your VST and your GEV. These things just were on amazing runs. And one of the things that, so I go back and forth with, because I'm a trend trader and I like to own the best names that are out there. But there's also something called diversification. And it's a principle that I believe in because I think that you want to own the best companies in various different sectors, not all in just one group, because you're leaving yourself to be susceptible to moves like we saw today. Now, these were ginormous moves. I mean, I don't, I'm trying to remember where I've seen something where I've seen names down 20 or 30%. And I'll give you an example of this. And I think if you go through, so these were the day's movers. Let's see. And by the way, like we're looking at the gainers today. So I'm just enhancing this so that you can see this. Like the top 46 names, large companies, over 5 billion, right? And there's a lot of names in here. There's over 40, there's over 50 names. If I go scroll down a little bit, that were up over 3%. So there is a huge amount of names that went higher today. It's also a huge amount that names that went lower. And I will add that if this AI situation gets cheaper for everybody and it requires less power, that's actually, outside of those particular stocks that you may have been holding or had some exposure to in the AI space, it's actually a pretty darn good thing for a lot of companies that can now spend less. They can get access to AI or the possibility of getting AI cheaper, right? And not spending so much money and not using so much power where the power grid is going to be off the charts. Now, I'm not an expert on AI. I don't know if this DeepSeek thing, like if that's the answer to having cheaper AI. But I think if someone can do it, like I think that there's going to be other parties that come along and they can kind of crack this and say, hey, we can do this for cheaper. And I'm not necessarily talking about like the fastest. Like Nvidia is, for now, right, is going to be the company to own if you want the fastest and the most robust AI. But there's going to be some backing and filling too, where not everybody needs that. Not everybody needs to have to spend the fastest, right? There's different price models. When you think about, I was thinking about this earlier with drug pricing too. Sometimes this happens too. Now that's a little bit different, but sometimes, like for example, there'll be a drug out there and it will go off patent and it will go to generic and it becomes cheaper than for people to use it, and that's a good thing. Now that's not the same thing with AI about there's a lifespan, but what does happen is it's a competitive market and new players come in, whether or not they're from China or some other place. Like it's not going to stay expensive for like as expensive forever because that's the efficiency of a market. More market players come in and say, hey, this is really expensive. What if we can create something that's half as much money, and maybe it's not losing as much, half as much speed, right? So that's just going to happen. That's how a market functions, right? That's how an efficient market functions, whether it's the stock market or just, the competitive landscape of the country, right? Is that there's always going to be somebody that's going to increase when there's a lot of margin and when there's money to be made, it is going to increase entrance to the market, provided that there's not as many barriers to entry and things are going to get cheaper, right? And you could go back and you could look at any technology, whether it's the first personal computer or the first iPhone, right? All these things have gotten cheaper because technology gets more efficient and more people come in and they put their heads together and they create something better. Hey, that's just how it is. So it's important to kind of, I think, take that step back today and have a little bit of understanding that cheaper AI is actually a good thing. Now, whether like again, the whole China thing, I'm not going to get into that because you could argue that that's not good and that's fine. But it's open source and a lot of times when something is open sourced, it allows people to kind of come in and take hold of it and possibly make it better. So these are these are the names that went up today. There's a lot of big moves. And then of course, here's the names that went down today, and you're going to find the similar theme that happened. NBIS was down 37% today, right? Credo was down 30% today. VRT, VST, both down about the same, about 29%. These are amazing moves. And then you have the nuclear plays in here. Oklo, SMR down 25, down 27%. So it kind of goes back. BE, which is a name that I'm long, and I actually added to this position today. And some of these things you weren't going to be able to come in and say, oh, geez, I'm going to get out for down, down 4 or 5%. These things were already down, like we're already getting smoked by the open. So there wasn't much. So if you were long these names, a bunch of them going into today, there wasn't a whole hell of a lot that you could do. But there are things, obviously, you could go back hindsight 2020, but you could think about like, okay, it's great that all these things, the VST and the VRT and CLS, which I don't see on this list, was another one too. Maybe CLS didn't fall that much, but all of these things, they're the same trade. They're relying on AI and power and the possibility of working on AI and so on and so forth, and supplying chips and so forth. So, but they're all basically the same thing is wrapped around them. So that's not diversification. So you have to ask yourself, and again, let's look at a couple of these things. Before we do that, I want to just bring up the chart of TLT. Sorry to jump back and forth, but I feel like I'll forget this. I think this also has been spurring some rotation, is that TLT is now pressing into the bottom of the value area. Now, we've got a lot of things this week, right? We're going to have bond auctions, right? We had two bond auctions today, by the way. We had a 2-year and we had a 5-year. We had a 2-year at 11:30 and then a 5-year. You're also going to get the 7-year. And I think that's it for this week. I think just the 7-year, and we get T-bills. I don't see anything else. So you'll get the 7-year tomorrow. Then also a reminder that for this week, we're going to get a Fed meeting this week too. Plus, we're going to get PCE data, which is another gauge of inflation. So this week is chock full of data, not just on the macro side, but also all the names that are reporting earnings. But I do think that if TLT continues to move here, you're going to see some other things that are going to be bought. And that's what basically happened today. There was definitely a move, a flight to some of these things. The home builders are a little bit more attractive than they were a week ago. You know, just more value type names are, could have the possibility of doing better. We talked about that a lot. Energy has been a very big performer, but I also talked about how energy. So if we look at crude, crude has not been able to break higher, right? So crude, some of these moves, you kind of think about them as trades. Sorry, someone's calling me, but I'm not sure who that is. But here's crude. Crude did not break out, right? So crude was a nice trade in the beginning of the year. There still will probably be opportunities in this space, but I think that you have to just be realistic too. Here's EQT in the weekly chart, which has been one of the strongest names. Look at this name coming down because this is also tied to AI and AI energy and that type of thing. But I think that you're going to get more opportunities, but you have to be, in my opinion, taking some off the table as we have a nice move up here. EQT went 46 to 54. Right. So, and that's what I try to do basically is trim as we're moving up. I try to leave like half the trade on for a further breakout. Now I'm not long in my trading account this one, but I was long ET, and I think I took 3 targets in ET, and now I might add back. I didn't have to add to everything today, but this is a check back to the top of the value area. But and look at the volume today and some of these names today. So I was going to go through a few more names here. So I talked a little bit about SPY. I talked a little bit about TLT, and I talked a little bit about crude. Let's look at the index charts here for a minute. So I want to bring up S&P futures because this is a little bit cleaner. I can go over SPY levels too, but this is my level that I tweeted out earlier this morning. I said, watch, we're coming into the bottom of the value area. I thought that the S&P had a good chance to outperform, and I actually bought SPY pre-market this morning because I thought that we had a nice level to trade against. That's something that we were talking about in the pre-market prep this morning too. Have a level to trade against. So this way, and this is where we were. Came right into the bottom of the value area, and this held, and we started to grind higher. Now we're going to have some resistance here, and that's right around 6064 in S&P futures. SPY again is going to look a little bit different because we didn't go all the way down to the bottom of the value area, but we went down to the bottom of the maybe we did go down to the bottom of the value area for the oh, this is pre-market. That's why. Okay, gotcha. Because we began to rally pre-market, but so interesting. This was 590 spot 33. So if we go back to this, so we did hit here pre-market 590 spot 33, and we bounced from there. Again, I always like the futures charts better when we've got big movement in the after hours market because you're gonna see all that. I hate how you can't see pre-market or after hours activity on a regular SPY chart, even though it definitely occurs. It's one of the biggest things that I don't like about some of the charts. And then of course it leaves a gap, and then people say, "Oh, look at this gap." But meanwhile, price traded all the way down here to the bottom of the value area. Qs, let's look at this as well, and we can look at Nasdaq. We'll do the same thing. We'll look at Nasdaq futures just so that we can see what transpired here. But look at that. So we closed right at the bottom of the value area, and notice where we kind of came back to those lows that were back in the middle of the month, so not that long ago, and this rebounded quite nicely, and also you get the added kicker. I see that Nasdaq futures were still rallying after the cash close today, so nice kick save here back into the value area. So a lot of this is too, unfortunately, it's a shakeout. It's shaking out all the overcrowded, a lot of these areas, and I'm just going to finish up here with IWM because I think it's interesting with IWM that this kind of stayed around the 50-day moving average. It's still around the 50-day moving average, but it's a pretty decent rejection, I would say. Let's talk a little bit about like something like a GEV, right? And I tried to actually buy the dip in this thing because I didn't have any GEV on today, but I wanted to see if the top of value would hold. Unfortunately, it didn't. Now, what that means is too, after a day where this stock is down over 20%, it's just overcrowded. There's a lot of people in these names, and it may take a couple days for that to cycle through, being that there's so many, that these are so overcrowded, right? Because everybody's looking at these things. So like if you open up Twitter, and I'm not saying anything negative about Twitter, but everybody's kind of been looking at the same names, right? They've been breaking out, and that's also something that you have to be mindful of. If every person on Twitter is looking at the same name as you are, usually it's not going to work out as well. And if you find, like, I always like when I find setups where hardly anybody's talking about them. That means that they're not overcrowded, right? And that means that they may continue to go up and no one will notice them and for a little bit. So that happens quite a bit. I noticed that with I mentioned CLS earlier, but there was less people, and geez, look at that candle, right? But I think as this thing broke higher, I think more and more people started to kind of jump on the bandwagon of this thing, with rightly so. But I think that you have to be somewhat realistic with these things and say, hey, if everybody's talking about CLS and it's really extended versus the overall market, taking profits makes a lot of sense. Now, again, this type of stuff, I will tell you, in my experience of trading for a long time, you don't usually see this big of a move like this, down 28% in one day. And all of these names associated with one another, I don't want to say all of them, but a lot of them getting hit like this. I think it just goes to how overcrowded this trade was. And it's just something to be cognizant of, is that names can really get overbought like this, and overbought and overcrowded where everybody's in these things. I will give you an example. Like, I had tried tweeting about, like, a little bit about energy stocks in the beginning of the year. No one wanted anything to do with energy stocks, even though they started to act really well and so forth. I couldn't get people to look away from the AI stuff and the power trade and so forth. I just couldn't get any traction with telling people like that. And like, okay, like the financials have been acting really well. So hard to get people to look away from the pocket of 5 or 6 stocks. And if they're all, I'll say it one more time and then I'll move on. But if they're all in the same group, you're opening yourself up to the possibility that you're really concentrating your bets. So if something bad does happen, whether it's somebody comes out with a better AI model or something other of that nature, you're opening yourself up to a lot of risk. So why do I mention this? Number one, I had a few names on. I had a couple semiconductors on. So I didn't have an on Nvidia, but I had Broadcom on, and I had Taiwan Semiconductor. So I had a pretty bad day today. And I always try to kind of tell you what's going on with my portfolio. So I gave back some profits today. Again, there's not much you can do with when you have a gap down like this. The only thing that you could really do is just protect yourself and understand, spread your bets around a little bit. It's okay to be in my opinion, a couple names that are still acting really well that just aren't all in the same damn thing. Because you're gonna find that like it's not frequent, but there could be, and I've seen this before, where everybody, I can give you other examples. I've seen it before in years past where everybody gets into software names and people start owning 7, 8 different software names. And all of a sudden, like, somebody's model says, hey, take profits. And you'll see all those software names down 7, 10%. Now, we haven't had that in a while because software hasn't gotten as overcrowded, but we're going back a couple of years ago where software just was doing extremely well. So it's one of those situations where you have to be careful when the music stops playing, right? Everybody's having a party, it's musical chairs, right? And then all of a sudden when that music stops, things can get slammed down. So I have seen that before. I've seen the software names get hit really hard. Speaking of which, let's talk a little bit about them. IGV did very well today, right? Perhaps and I talked about this on Twitter a little bit earlier. Now, they didn't close on their highs. They got off to a really good start. But was talking about things like Team last week and ESTC, right? I think RBRK had a good day today. Right. So it's a little bit of a shift. Oh, wow, that didn't even close, touch the highs. This is another very overcrowded trade too. So you have to be careful because the more overcrowded these things are, just the harder it's going to be. People are going to take profits quicker. And then of course there's other areas. Apple did really well today. Everybody got really down on Apple. Apple did not close on the highs. It looks like it filled this gap. But I traded a little bit of this today. I didn't hold it as long as I should. I think I sold mine at like around 228. But this was a nice looking trade. This one worked. I had some success with some things. Like I said, I tried to buy the dip in GEV, which didn't work today. But I did go long Apple because I thought it might be an Apple kind of day. Remember, Apple's not developing necessarily AI, or at least I don't think they're doing a huge amount of it. I think they're borrowing it from this company or that company. So you get, these companies, if they're going to get AI cheaper, somewhere, somehow in the future. Again, I'm not saying it's DeepSeek, but it'll be a positive for them, right? It won't be as much. We just heard about that from Meta, saying that they're going to spend all this money, right, on revamping all this, right? So all of a sudden, why did Meta go up today? Well, probably because there's a chance that they're going to still do that investment, or maybe they do less of it. Maybe they don't need to do as much, right? And they're going to get these models, the AI models, and what they need maybe a little bit cheaper, right? Maybe there's some hope for them that they don't have to spend top dollar. All right, I'm going to end. Let's see, I wanted to just go over home builders. I talked a little bit about them. Communication companies did well. Healthcare did very well today. Consumer staples did very well today too. Some of this with interest rates helping. I also just wanted to bring up the Dow, right? Because people forget about the Dow as well. But this had a really nice reversal type day today. And if you look at the movers in here, right, I know Salesforce was one of them today. But, again, you're going to find things that are just a little bit different. And in my opinion, everybody's different, but there's nothing wrong, in my opinion, with finding, playing an Apple for today or playing a Walmart. Walmart is a leader of its group, right? So if you're going to be in something, look at how well Walmart did today, right? Walmart broke out. It is what it is. It's the leader within its industry, or one of them, right? But that's a clean breakout, right? So the tape isn't always going to be growth centered or value centered. So it does help to understand, like, go into each group and have ammunition ready and say, okay, if it's going to be more of a value day, what are you going to trade? Maybe a JP Morgan. I don't know if JP Morgan did much today, but it certainly didn't sell off. It finished in the green today, right? So I hope that you're getting the point that I'm trying to make, is that there's many different things, like, and especially today, it's very interesting that the market held up as well as it did, with the Dow finishing, not that I trade the Dow or so forth, but I understand it. But even looking at RSP today, which is the equally weighted S&P, finished in the green today. So again, it just shows you how overcrowded that group of stocks did get. Now, those groups of stocks, on the positive side, they've acted well for a long time. But it's okay for this market to widen out a little bit. All right, I'll leave it there, guys. Again, going to have a lot of events this week, with not only a lot of big earnings reports, but also a lot of macro events too, with the PCE this week as well as the Fed meeting. So buckle up. You don't need to be fully, fully aggressive this week, and it's also about interpreting some of the information out there. I'll leave it there for now, guys. Have a great night.